No, this is not clickbait. Ball Sim Torb are actually meta.
Back it up, rack it up. I'ma have a ball with a bitch.
Crazy Raccoon, they're on the Torb sim. They are believers in this DPS composition.
But why is this? Symmetra is the least picked DPS in the game, and for the tanks, the same story goes for Ball. But clearly, there's more to that story. Is what we're seeing just another gimmick, or are these heroes secretly overpowered? Let's break it down. First off, let's set the stage. Unless you've been living under a rock, the meta for the last 2 months has been Hazard, Genji, Sojourn. All 3 of those heroes specialize in burst damage and burst mobility, so in order to beat it, you would need characters that can survive that burst. That's where the Sim and Torb come in. They both have the sustain to live through a Hazard engage thanks to their higher HP pools, but they've also got the damage to melt through Hazard's block, thanks to Torb's shotgun and Symmetra's beam. The best example of this has to be in the game between Sakura and Genji. Sakura roll out on a pretty standard Hazard comp. Meanwhile, Genji are playing the full-out Torb Sim Ball comp. On the first fight, they've got a simple 3-2 setup, with the Ball, Sim and Torb playing to the left, while the Ana and Lucio play to the right. This is very important for later, so keep this in mind. This setup allows the Lucio to easily help the Ana at any time, making sure she's not isolated. Meanwhile, the Torb and the Sim can sustain any pressure and leave at any time thanks to the TP. That actually happens almost immediately. As soon as the enemy Tracer pressures the Symmetra and the Hazard dives her too, the Sim just heads out. During that exchange, Top Dragon pops the Overload to punish the Tracer. Overload is great in these defensive cases, but it's also great when used offensively too. Your DPS goes from 137 on your primary fire to 175, and on your secondary fire shotgun, it goes from 175 to 250 DPS. We see that damage immediately have an effect as Top Dragon just one-shots the Tracer out of thin air. Not to mention, the Symmetra uses the TP to threaten the Hazard, and once a Tori engages, Sauna just absolutely melts them. You can see the extra 25 HP that Sim has, making a clear difference because Sauna does go down to 21 HP. Of course, Sauna charges up that level 3 beam very easily, microwaving a Tori to a crisp. Sauna does eventually die to the Tracer, but the damage has already been done, and as a shocker to nobody, Hitori gets off the Hazard to go Queen. This fight, we see a slightly different 3-1-1 setup. This time, the Ball's playing alone, as well as the Torb playing alone on points. Meanwhile, the Sim, Ana and Lucio are playing as a group together on the high ground. Because Hitori went to Queen, her team has less mobility to punish split targets. Therefore, Torb can effectively be a lone wolf because even if Hitori walks onto him, nothing's gonna happen. Notice the sheer amount of distance the Torb has from the Queen.
That's quite big.
Top Dragon can just use his Overload, and thanks to the extra speed, he can just run away without much worry. That distance factor is very important when you're playing on your own as Torb. In this example, you can see Checkmate flank to the left here. However, he hasn't got much distance.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
As a result, he gets rushed on, isolated, and sent back to the spawn room.
Dead.
Back to Numbani, Sakura try and break this hold by teleporting the Sim and Queen over to the enclosed room. Since the enemy TP has already been used and Kanale is still very safe on the Ana, Sauna TPs over to the enemy Torb and Lucio. Kanale also hits a massive anti-nade onto the both of them. This prompts the Sim and Lucio to go chase for the kills, quickly catching the Lucio and eventually the Torb too. This is actually an incredibly smart play by Genji. If the enemy team use their TP just to move around the map and not cause any threats, then that can give you an opening to punish split targets with your own TP. This stuff is cutting edge at the moment, so props to Genji for this. To rub extra salt on the wound too, Top Dragon hits a very nice dink while his Ball slams the Sim. And unfortunately for the Queen team, the rest of their deaths are slow and painful, draining more of that precious time bank. Onto the penultimate fight, let's look at where the Sim and Torb turrets are. All 3 of Sauna's turrets are being used to mark flanks and gain scouting information, with one turret nested above the doorway to the high ground, the second being a follow-up turret, and the third one scouting anyone who might come underneath. You can actually see the first turret catch the Torb, which gets pinged to everyone on the team. Meanwhile, Top Dragon throws his turret in the corner of the car. This is what I like to call a catch turret. meaning to place your turret in an off angle adjacent to where you're playing. Say for example, the Queen and her team rush onto you as Torb. You obviously walk backwards, but your turret catches the enemy team rushing onto you. This means that they either don't shoot the turret, in which case your turret farms free ult charge, or they do shoot the turret, in which case that's also good because they're not shooting you. Again, similar to the last fight, we see a very similar 3-1-1 setup. This time, to avoid any splits, the entirety of Sakura take the TP to the high ground in order to clear it. This causes Sauna to use his TP more defensively, teleporting backwards to create distance and live through the Queen Rush. However, because of the Torb's angle, Top Dragon is able to punish the enemy Symmetra, giving his team a big leg up. Kaneo lands the finishing blow onto the Lucio too, but he's not done there. He also hits the sleep dart onto Prota, getting a huge stagger kill. Now onto last fight, and it's basically cooked for Sakura. One look at the top left, and Gen G have all of their ultimates. Prota starts by dropping the Kitsune on points, but that's quickly zoned out by Top Dragon's Molten Core. This is where we get into a move that I like to call the turn and burn. Basically, you zone the enemy supports so you can turn and burn the enemy tank. In this fight, the Molten Core does the zoning. The drop of Molten Core by the left doorway alongside the Molten Core on the main doorway completely zones off the Kiriko. This means that Hitori is left completely alone and gets turned and burned by 5 people at once. Hopefully this shows that the power of Molten Core isn't in the damage, but the threat of the damage that zones people entirely. Afterwards, Zoro panics out their own Molten Core, but sadly ends up dying. Unsurprisingly, Gen G get a full hold, playing what would have been considered an off-meta comp just a week ago. Now, remember when I said to not forget that 3-2 setup earlier? Well, here's why. On Sakura's defense here, they actually have the Lucio and Symmetra swapped around. This ends up being a fatal error for Sakura because as soon as the Sombra dives the Ana, there's literally no help. While the Lucio is defending against the ball, Prota is fighting their demons, and even worse, the Sombra ends up living somehow. Now with the Ana dead, Gen G end up closing this map in under 10 seconds. Had Sakura adopted a similar setup to Gen G, this probably doesn't happen. So time to address the elephant, or I suppose, hamster in the room. I haven't really talked about ball that much. That's mainly because we've already seen ball being played before Sim and Torb came into the meta, and also because teams ban ball a lot, and I mean a lot, so it's a bit harder to make content. With that being said, ball has 3 main jobs. Firstly, to duel targets on angles, especially flankers like Tracer. Mag does that twice in the first fight, initially by the coast side, but also when the Tracer gets one-tapped by Top Dragon. Ball's second job is to disrupt. You'll be looking for boops or roll-throughs to split certain targets away from their team, like how Mag does to the Kiriko here, forcing Suzu. In the best cases, your disruption can directly lead to kills. In this example, Hardy boops and splits the Torb, and even with Torb sustain, he does eventually die. Last but not least, you'll also be diving the backline too, or in other words, committing pile driver and mines and actively looking for kills. Usually, you'll do this later in the fight when you've got some kind of advantage that you want to push. All this means that Ball is incredibly good at zoning backlines and keeping them at bay. In this fight, you can see Chase on the Ball zone the enemy backline away from the Sigma. The overclock helps with this too, but Chase keeps the backline at bay. Now that the Brig, Juno and Ash are playing in Narnia, this allows the rest of Chase's team to turn and burn the Sigma with overclock. As a little cherry on top, Ball is also great at scouting enemies beforehand thanks to the third person view that he has. Small but important. Now, is this where the story ends for the Ball Sim Torb comp? Well, yes and no. Ball and Sim are much more map dependent than Torb, who's honestly pretty hard meta. Despite that, there's a lot more complexity behind Sim and Torb that goes beyond kill hazard foreheads. Whether that's the scouting, the smart mid-fight TPs, Torb's ability to be a 2-man army with his turrets, or the turn and burn playstyle, which is clearly very effective when Torb has a special source. Season 15 is dropping soon, which could definitely shake things up, but this is the most exciting Overwatch has been for me, and hopefully for you too. I mean, who else is getting 3 random hammer kills in 2 maps? If you enjoyed, please do be sure to like and share this video, because it helps out a bunch. Click this video on screen too, because I'll reckon you'll like it. If you also want to get my coaching, check out the link below. Until next time.